Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a privilege to be back and to be able to talk about my project. What I'm talking about with the paper that I sent today, and apologies that it was way over the prescribed length, but I'll try to summarize it here, springs from the project that I'm working on for the past couple of years called Deep Mapping the Asklepieion of Pergamon. And this is a way of looking at sanctuaries as nodes of connection between people and places over space, but also over time. And it's especially this element of the interaction through time that I'm focusing on now, and I'm trying to come to terms with as to how this works, as what these red arrows indicate. So this project focuses on the gravity of place, but I'm also looking at the temporal depth of place and how this works. So the gravity of time is the topic for today. So it's the first beginning in approaching sanctuaries as timescapes and relating this to urbanity. So after some definitions, I will focus on my principal case study, the Asklepieion of Pergamon, and then I will give a brief timeline, not to be confused with a timescape, which I'll define shortly. And then we'll focus, so I'll go through the timeline of Pergamon, and then we'll sort of make a U-turn, focus at the end, and see which ways the sanctuary was looking back as it was also looking forward. So seeing how these timescapes feed into a sense of urbanity and also attempting to draw out perhaps a conceptualization of co-temporality at the end, and I appreciate your help in this. But first, defining timescape. So it's a very loosely defined term, which is fun. It means I can do probably whatever I want with it. But there are two key factors in it, and one of these is the multidimensionality. So connecting your time with another time in the past, present, or future, but also agency. And this is implied through the active suffix of scape, timescape. This is something that Apaderai was highlighting in looking at economic landscapes, looking at the word landscape, which also derives from the Dutch word landschap, from scheppen, to create, or in German Landschaft, from schaffen. So this is an active creation, an active creative element in this. Then when we look at defining sacred landscapes, I'm using this as a working definition, uses of sacrality to establish links between the past, the present, and the future, thereby creating a deep sense of time. So again, it's with the focus on agency, purpose, and perception. So sacrality and deep time are things that go together very well. Time takes on a different dimension at sanctuaries. So there is the ritual marking of time through calendars and sundials, a metrical establishment of time, which I won't go into here. But there's also the special rhythm of ritual, very different from the everyday. And this is what Jan Assmann's festival time takes us into, how when you are at a festival, you have a very different perception of time than everyday uses of time. So this is in the context of cultural memory, which we just heard about and yesterday as well. But local histories also play into this with their deep concern of, or their concern of the deep mythological past, or the uses of divine interventions. And Dillery gets into this with his sacred histories, in which he relies or uses quite a bit Gerke's use of intentional histories, so writing history with a purpose as a way to shape the future as well. Narratives that are told not just out of antiquarian interest, but with a directive way of shaping the future. Literary works, literary testimonies and sources are certainly one way of looking at this, but there's a variety of other media that we can also see as time travelers. In fact, we could consider all kinds of material culture, all kinds of objects in this context, placed within temporal context, and oftentimes with the intention to last and to impress future generations as well. All of these objects come from the Asklepieion in Pergamon, and all have different ways of telling us about different kinds of timescapes. And I'll go into those in a moment. But maybe for those who are less familiar with the ancient world and its gods, Asklepios was the god of healing, the son of Apollo. His cult places were places where people came to looking for healing as they sought, as they found it through sleep, through dreams, visions, with the god instructing them what to do. Epidaurus was an epicenter of his cult, and it tended to spread out from there, and it arrived in Pergamon in the 4th century BC. So before Pergamon actually became a major center of the Attalid kingdom. Just to show you where the Sanctuaries is located, it's about 4 kilometers southwest of the urban center of Pergamon, so it's far from, it's certainly beyond the city walls. And surveys by the German Archaeological Institute now are surrounding this area and are highlighting the funerary landscape. I think I have a, well, anyway, all of the gray blobs around there are funerary zones, so it's really sort of embraced by the past, by the dead of a deathscape of Pergamon. I will describe this sanctuary briefly. I will just go through the timeline in five phases of its over 700 years of functioning as a cult place for Asklepios. The first phase is perhaps when Asklepios was introduced to the site from the late 5th to the first quarter of the 3rd century BC, when it seems to have been a private cult centered in this natural basin leading down from Pergamon. Pergamon's on a mountain leading down from Pergamon into this basin, a water-rich area. In the second period, this is when the Attalids become involved. It starts to become connected with the rulers of Pergamon. It's the monumentalization of the sacred spring takes place, and it starts to expand. This continues in the 2nd century BC, probably at the hand of Attalus I, and further with Humanities, when it becomes now formalized enclosed sanctuary. And this is already a very monumental sanctuary, but one we never talked about because it becomes eclipsed in the later periods. But after the passing of the Attalids at the end of the 2nd century BC, it goes through a very complex period. The connections with Pergamon as a city becomes a civic cult. The connections are stronger and stronger, but it also becomes a place where the Romans flee to during the Mithridatic Wars, as the Pergamene people side with Mithridates in a revolt against Rome and slaughter all of their Roman neighbors looking for a refuge at the sanctuary. Unsurprisingly, it goes into a period of decline in this period, in this era, but towards the end of the century, it starts to come to life again, and by the 1st century AD, it is the connections are made ever stronger, and it becomes starts to become a very prominent place of cult. The connections with Pergamon are solidified through the Sacred Way processional route that now starts at the edge of the Roman theater of Pergamon. It's very faint there up in the upper right-hand corner of this. Oh, I don't think you see my mouse. Anyway, and this road is covered. It's the Via Tecta, so it's covered in this period. So it creates almost like a tunnel connecting the city to the shrine. So it's sort of the opposite of what I love looking at sanctuaries outside of cities and seeing how they're high on a hill, visible for everybody. This is the exact opposite situation. So you're proceeding from the city to the sanctuary through this tunnel where you come down into the space of the shrine. And this is what makes that space so exciting in the imperial era when it becomes this huge showcase of architecture framed on all of its sides. The sanctuary actually literally explodes. If I go back to that one, you can just see the core elements there, and now it's become this giant showcase of two soccer fields in size. This is where we have echoes of imperial Rome under Hadrian. At the same time, it continues its function as a healing center, but we see several benefactors from the city stepping in and staking their claims to the sanctuary by expanding it, by monumentalizing the sanctuary in unbelievable ways. It's unlike any other sanctuary in the ancient world at this time. So we see, I'll just highlight a few of them. We see one of the most famous is the Temple of Rufinus. It's supposed to be one and not two. But this is a round temple which is very much modeled on the Pantheon in Rome. So it's a direct echo, and it was built just within 20 years after the Pantheon in Rome was finished by Rufinus, who was close to Hadrian and also a senator in Rome. But the theater up in the corner was dedicated by Claudia Paulina, who is the sister of Tiberius Claudius Paulinus, who is a prominent figure in the cult of the goddess of Roma and Augustus, and also received a funerary altar from Pergamon at the Asklepieion. So elites and their families were also very much on display here. Flavia Melittina dedicated the library, the square up in the upper right, and a statue of the divine Hadrian on behalf of her family. The main gateway was dedicated by Claudius Carax. And okay, I need to stick with my script here. And it's just this major place of connectivity. So we have these two temporal phases of the Asklepieion going on. As you enter the shrine, you see the traditional, the center place of cult, the old, let's say, conservative area of cult. You face the temple, you face the altars, you face the incubation space. It's surrounded by this portico. But when you turn around, you see an image of Rome. So you see this sort of echo of the Pantheon with a symmetrical gateway that's on the right side there. Moreover, when you proceed into the sanctuary, this is the first timescape, and I'll go through these quickly, so we have in this tunnel, as I was saying, it ends in this monumental colonnaded street that leads you into Carax's gateway, and this street is lined with historical figures from the classical Greek past. We have Xenophon, Euripides, Socrates, ending in Hadrian, but this is part of the second sophistic. And there's a whole story to be told about how Aelius Aristides and his sacred tales come into play and inform us very much with this, but that's in the paper. I will move to the second timescape now. So besides this formal, this cultural element that's introduced by these major elite families who are staking their claims to the sanctuary, we have the rituals that continue, the people that are remembering, that are incorporating memories of their cures, of their rituals of healing through these small bronze plaques by inscribing sometimes just their names and dedicating it to Asklepios at the same time. Sometimes they include some anatomical parts, as this one with Tapari, but this creates a ritual timescape in a sense, which Patsalis Diomedes describes here so well. But she describes this as a timeless, miraculous community as these people seeking healing are wandering between the sculptures and reminders of people from the past. So they're engaging with this localized memory landscape of memories of healing. But it's not just about that. So this is also a landscape, a timescape that is very carefully construed by the city through the monumental honors that it bestows upon prominent citizens of Pergamon, emperors, local elites, but also philosophers, sophists, agonathetes, people responsible for organizing the games and the festivals, and general benefactors are honored here by Pergamon, who also notes that it's working towards a conclusion here, who also describes itself as metropolis of Asia, first, twice, Neokoros, and these are high honors that the emperor himself bestows. So as they're honoring other members of their community, they are also honoring the emperor. So these all took place here in this particular area, just between the theater and the altars, this very prominent, highly visible space. And as Pergamon is honoring these people, they are also creating their own geopolitical network. This is an example of all of the outreach that these inscriptions, that these people had to other places as well, of course, including Rome. And to wrap this up, finally, Christina, sorry. To wrap this up, so we have urban dreams, and I'm looking at these different temporalities, these different timescapes, as a way of seeing them as co-temporalities, of looking at how the timescapes of elite families representing themselves were interwoven with rituals of healing, with this long tradition of leaving dedications, votives behind, but also how the civic body of Pergamon establish its connection to the city. So I would see this Asklepieion as sort of a hyper-urban space, a pocket of urbanity in a sense outside the city, but this microcosm that involves empire, the local families, and anyone who's seeking medical healing. Thank you very much for your patience, and I look forward to your insights.